Welcome to the Engaged by Design podcast, where we drive innovation and help you as a leader engage more learners more effectively. I'm Dr. Vernon Smith, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Michael Cottam.
Thank you, Vernon. It's good to be back again. This is part 3 of our conversation with Dr. Kate Zatz. So looking forward to what we learn next. So, Kate, as we've been speaking about student experience and graduate experience, you have kind of an interesting story, even within your family, of dealing with some issues that happen in higher education, in particular with anti-Semitism. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm going to give a little bit of backstory. I was raised Presbyterian, and I didn't know until after my father had died, because my mom wasn't supposed to talk about this, is that her grandmother was Jewish. And so in northern Wisconsin, apparently you weren't really supposed to talk about being Jewish during the early, during the 1950s and early 60s. After my mom and dad were in a horrible car accident, and my dad passed, but my mom lived on. And there came a day that I had told my parents that I was marrying a Jewish man. I flew down to Florida to do that because I thought they were going to be upset. Well, it turns out, my mom says, got some news for you. Your great-grandmother was Jewish. So when I was marrying David, I'm an ordained elder of the Presbyterian Church. And there wasn't an option to raise our children Presbyterian. That wasn't going to happen. And I didn't convert to Judaism, but there came this point where, so I know that this is in my DNA, in my haplog K group. And I heard the whole fascinating story right when my daughter was going through her bat mitzvah. So what this means is at some point in my life, as I was marrying Dave and raising kids, I made that decision that my kids were going to be raised Jewish. There wasn't going to be any question about that. And I would provide them with an opportunity to go into therapy, to talk to therapists in the future about the idea that they had this little bit of conflict in their parents' relationship, but it's really not, because as far as I'm concerned, Jesus was a Jew. Okay, so I raise these 2 kids. We go through Zoe's bat mitzvah. We go through Ben's bar mitzvah. Ben is Ben, who goes by the name Abi, has now been to Israel. It will be his 4th or 5th trip this coming March. And he identifies as being Jewish. So does Zoe, but Ben really does, to the point that the young man can cantillate straight from the Torah without vowels, can read it, write it, speak it, knows his faith, knows the Torah. And he, as an undergraduate, during COVID, spent quite a bit of time during his freshman year online. He's one of those kids that graduated high school online. And when he finally got to the University of Vermont, I was hoping that it would be an experience like mine, where it was like, oh, this is utopia. I never want to leave. So he moved into the Hillel house at the University of Vermont. And it was a point in time when tensions between Palestine and Israel were mounting. And politically in Vermont, there was this movement in the Burlington Town Council to divest investments in Israel or companies that do business in Israel. And this, of course, would include Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And strange things started happening on that campus. Keep in mind that at this point, I'm down there in West Virginia. I'm president of American Public University System. I'm not on a traditional college campus. And I start getting hints from Ben that he's not very happy, and things have been happening on that campus. And there was a series of events where the Hillel house was rocked, rocks thrown at it, feces put in the hallway by Ben's room, Jewish students being told in syllabi that your grade will be reduced by 1 whole point if you're Jewish. Just a whole series of things that are totally out there, totally wild to me. So Ben is up there at the University of Vermont, and there's a whole series of events that happen. And I'm sort of oblivious, but sort of not. And we do this thing on Sunday afternoons, which is another good thing that if you want to stay in touch with your kids, you do. Is every Sunday night at 6:00, we have Zoom dinner. Mm-hmm. We catch each other. We touch base with each other. We're a fun family. I mean, we laugh together. Anyway, so out of the blue, I get this telephone call from Ben, and he basically says to me, there's a group of us that have had it, and we've talked to our provost here about these anti-Semitic incidents that are happening on our campus. And we've been totally blown off. Nothing's going to happen. Somehow or another, Ben and this group reach out to Jewish on Campus, which is a national grassroots organization of students across the United States that are Jewish on different campuses. They talk to each other. They've got their own platforms, and they do their own training. And Jewish on Campus leadership hooks Ben up with the Brandeis Center, which is the Brandeis Center for Civil Rights Under the Law, which is its total name. The Brandeis Center and Jewish on Campus meet with the kids that are having these issues at the University of Vermont, and they end up filing what's called a Title VI complaint with the Department of Education, so that complaints and the things that are happening on their campus will be recorded and be investigated. Well, the thing is, my experience in higher education, I am totally like, are you kidding me? This is happening in this day and age? Well, the Brandeis Center took it up as an issue, filed the complaint with the Department of Ed. Department of Ed did a perfunctory, if I may, investigation and told the University of Vermont, you need to do X, Y, and Z to make your campus more hospitable to Jewish students, Zionist students, and you need to change these policies and practices so that complaints like this are heard. So this phenomenon, as much as I know about higher ed, was kind of new to me, but since about 2020, I've been following this. And there are no less than 70 campuses that have had Title VI complaints that are very similar to what happened to Ben at University of Vermont. 70 institutions that have complaints like this, where the Brandeis Center ended up helping file complaints. Jewish on Campus, a national organization, has done things and worked with students like Ben to the point that he has done training for them. He's a law student now down at the University of Florida. He's in his second year. He did volunteer work with them for the last couple of years, doing peer advisement on this is the process that you follow. This is how you file a complaint. This is how you work with your administration to change their policies. This is how. And he also has worked with some institutions at the student affairs level, as has Jewish on Campus and the Brandeis Center, speaking to specific institutions about this is what you might want to do now. And this is how you become more sensitized to anti-Semitism on your campus. So although it wasn't, and it's not his area of expertise for my son, wasn't intentionally his bubble area of expertise, he's become quite knowledgeable at facilitation for students who are experiencing these things. I am still dumbfounded that in this day and age that this is something happens. And I hate to say this, but it's getting worse. This last, couple of years here at Columbia University, issues that have arisen about divestment, and divestment for institutions about where they have invested in Israel. It's really kind of depressing in some ways.
It's hard to believe, like you say, that this is going on now.
Kate, you're a Columbia graduate, right? Columbia's been in the spotlight for anti-Semitism and related behaviors. So what I hear you saying is that these are factual things that are going on, and that they're in large higher education institutions, and that the leadership of many institutions has the first reaction to minimize the anti-Semitism or go through the whole Kubler-Ross model of starting with denial. As a problem-solving, forward-thinking, experienced administrator and president, Kate, what advice would you give to leadership in higher education at the highest levels? And, what advice would you give them to be on the right side of history and do the right thing?
So here's the long approach on this, is when you take a look at some institutions and the overturning of administrative roles where the penultimate president at Columbia, for example, has a master's degree. You take a look at the training of people who end up in these roles and their length of service and the kinds of backgrounds that they have. And are they coming out of a singular department at an institution into the role of the president? The broad kind of training that you really do need to have to be an effective president is something that at one point in time was highly valued. But in some of the turnover that I've been seeing in the last, 10 years, it's not uncommon for institutions to put somebody who's a marketer or an MBA who doesn't have a whole lot of depth of knowledge about cultures of higher education institutions, where there's an assumption that basically anybody can do that job. I don't think so. And part of what I think happened at Columbia was a lack of awareness of the upper administration. And then there's the whole thing about, professional organizations that should be sharing this information, and it should be on the agenda of their annual meetings and their regional meetings, and where student affairs staff and academic leaders get together. It's not necessarily a topic that gets a whole lot of depth and coverage. And it really should. And it shouldn't just be related to Jewish students. It should be anybody who's affected by Title VI, which would be basically any minority group or group that has an affiliation based on culture. So, some of these things, higher ed had been doing pretty well. I think it kind of got sloppy maybe 15, 20 years ago. And I think we're paying the consequences for that now. Also, the kinds of work that the Brandeis Center and Jewish on Campus are doing ought to be highly publicized and ought to be readily available for colleges and campuses that want to take advantage to that. Like doing a training with Jewish on Campus about how to address in your policies and procedures right now what you're going to do if you ever get a complaint. The other thing is, too often I have seen in my career that when something happens on campus, it's like going back to one of my first jobs. Talk about being naive. I didn't realize that because they don't teach you this in graduate school. One of the first things that is a typical response is to shift blame. Like if something happens on campus, where, somebody stubs a toe who has diabetes and probably has a whole lot of other issues. The first thing you do is, rather than keeping them there on campus to treat them, you transport them. Get that problem out of our jurisdiction as fast as you can. So, sometimes policies and procedures need to be reviewed to, is anti-Semitism something that you can set aside and not deal with? Probably not. No, it's not. I was rather fortunate when I worked at Mundelein College in Chicago. There was a gentleman there that I audited a course on the Holocaust. It was really, truly eye-opening. And this is one of those other things that I've done throughout my life. If you really took a look at my resume, you would find I'm always enrolled in something. I'm always taking a course in something, even if
Yes,
it's
you
auditing
are.
a course. So
I can testify to that. Yes, you are.
It's like I took a course on I took a course on the Holocaust when I was at Mundelein, and it was really very eye-opening. But yeah, the capacity to keep on learning and doing something different is always something that I'm doing.
Kate, you bring up something that I'd like you to react to, and that is, I'll call it knowledge management or knowledge continuity. And you said that, folks are getting sloppy about certain things. You wouldn't expect anti-Semitism to be on the rise. You wouldn't expect other problems that we're seeing in higher education to be on the rise. And part of it, my hypothesis is that there's a lack of knowledge continuity. And you sort of inferred a little bit of that with the type of leadership that's being put in many institutions that don't have a higher education background, that don't understand the cultures of that. I wonder if you had any thought about knowledge continuity in that context.
Well, Vernon, I think we both see this, where if you follow what's posted on higheredjobs.com, where you can see as going into the month of March, there'll be, I'm predicting 80 to 90 presidencies open. And then as we turn around, we go through the fall, it'll be 30 to 40, if even that. See, I kind of went in my career from being pretty, I'm going to work in higher ed, very directed. I'm going to work in higher ed. These are the kinds of things that I think I can do, what I can accomplish. And I set out on this career. The thing is I've been going through it, and it's like getting toward the end, and I'm going, I have done most of the steps, if not all of the steps, of knowing every single aspect of what one would need to fulfill the role of a president. And I still look at this and I go, some institution somewhere has just appointed somebody to be president who's like, I don't know, 25 years younger than I am, and doesn't have the breadth, depth of experience that I would have as a candidate. And I just got beat out for that presidency. And it's like, wait a minute. When did I ever think in my career that basically anybody can end up being the president of a university or a college or whatever? It's kind of weird to me that we don't value higher ed, and we don't value experience like I thought we did. Nor do we don't value it the way when I was doing informational interviews as a young pup. We don't value higher education in some of the different parts of it like I would. I mean, sure, I can tell you where in my academic career I probably mucked up is I probably should have taken from an epistemology point of view, I should have hunkered down in one of those classic areas of political science or history, where I have those two majors. I have 3 majors as an undergrad, but I probably should have continued it. Because I always wondered, well, did that knock me out? Or Was it that I didn't get an MBA, which I frankly don't think qualifies one to be president either? But when I take a look at my finance experience and my fundraising experience, and I take a look at the holistic part of it, I'm still looking at other candidates and going, what the heck made them pick that person? And it's beyond me. So, that's part of it. And then just culturally, I don't get anti-Semitism. I really don't. And I hope I never do. Our values and our character in this country about what is important to us would make me never want to understand what it is that would make us so anti-Semitic as a culture. Just doesn't, I don't get it.
Especially in the institutions of enlightenment, like higher education. It does seem, again, I think there's almost been like a forgetting, a lack of a wisdom, a lack of remembering of who we are, why we're here. And that seems to be, it appears when you talk about, they really forget or they got really messy, that for me is an indication of this forgetting. I'll also say a lack of respect, a lack of acknowledgement, and it's turning a blind eye to things because it's difficult to handle. And we know that if you embrace the problem and work on it as a community, that it will come together and you will be able to fix it.
The other thing is that, are we teaching history? What history are we teaching at this point?
Yes.
The further away from the Holocaust we get, on days like Holocaust Remembrance Day, what really, how does that influence curriculum? I'm fortunate that I live in a community that does, Teaneck, New Jersey, where there is an incredibly large Jewish population.
I want to see if we can shift just a little bit in terms of a hope for the future. I mean, Kate, from the stories you've told us, from the homeless to the other things that we've talked about in our conversation, it seems like you've been able to see actions that someone could take to make a difference, to make things better in this area of prejudice, of anti-Semitism. What gives you hope, or what helps us to see a future where we can get through and be better?
For us, it's how we raised our kids and what value system they have. Because I look at my two, Zoe and Ben also known as Avi, and what their priorities are and what they're contributing to. And, it's like, you flip that around this last week. Somebody showed me a picture of their new grandbaby, and I'm thinking, the first thing I think is, boy, that's the most hopeful thing I've seen all week.
Yeah.
So, it's not that I, goes back to, I screw up. I have some massive failures, but I get up and I keep going, because what's the alternative? Seriously. I just do. Ever since I was 10 years old, ran my mother over with the car. You get up.
you get up and you make sure that you hope something, and I believe that. I believe that serendipitously, a neighbor who's been watching you will also join in with that. That's a very...
And make cookies to celebrate, right?
Yeah,
to celebrate and get through this challenge.
That's a very hopeful and, actually still practical idea. Kate, as we like to wrap up our podcast altogether, one of the questions we like to ask is, and we've heard a lot of ways if you've done it, but want to give you the chance to have that final word of, how do you engage more learners more effectively?
I think I have peaked out on engaging learners with as evidenced by my signature on so many diplomas.
Nice. 97,000.
I think that there comes a point where it's okay for me to not be out there doing more and more and more. If anything, is being more like Mrs. Fredrickson. It's my role now to be more of the mentor and be the person who encourages. And I give you a fun example is that there are maybe 5 women at this point that I have done some mentoring work with that are now either vice presidents of student affairs or presidents of universities and colleges, where it's like, if that's all I ever did, that's enough.
I love that. It's like an awareness of how you can engage where you are, where you start where you are, you start where you stand. I love that.
Recognizing what you've done. It's pretty amazing to have spent a career like this in serving students and serving institutions
and still
so many
continue to
years.
do so.
Yeah.
And still continue to do so. Kate, that's the thing. I see that through line of your caring and compassion and service. And that's one of the things that we really, thank you for sharing with us on this podcast.
You're more than welcome. It's been kind of fun. It's nice to have to reflect for a few minutes.
It is fun. Thank you, as always, for joining us on the Engaged by Design podcast. We hope you enjoyed this 3-part conversation with Dr. Kate Zatz as much as we did. Be sure to check back in with us next week for our next fantastic guest.
If you want to shape future episodes, send us the questions you're wrestling with right now. We may feature it in an upcoming conversation. In the meantime, please follow, rate, and share the show. We appreciate you being here, and stay engaged by design.